Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our discussion on Thursday, our Q&A session. And today we're tackling one of my favorite stocks again, MTN. We've got Vaughan, and I see we've also got Athenkosi. Welcome, guys. Thank you very much for giving us your insights. Take it away.
Right, thanks, guys. I'm just waiting to get the presentation. I made a blup, so I should have asked Ati for a little bit earlier. Just give me 1 second. I've just got it. I just want to throw it up on the screen. But while we're doing that, Ati's our analyst on MTN, and he knows a hell of a lot more about MTN than I hope to. So that's why I've asked him to come and join us, so that he will basically give the full background to the company and what we've just written on it of late. So there's some interesting work that Ati's done. Just grab this thing again, and then he will be able to kick off and give you the full picture. I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. I'm just going to reduce this down. I know it's the best way to do it is we should put it into presentation mode, but I like to see all my screens, so I'm just going to leave it like that. Over to you, Ati. Thanks.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. As Vaughan mentioned, we'll have a discussion on MTN. And I think today that what we try to achieve is contextualize the recent results where we are, and sort of explain why we saw some market movements of more recently. We still like the company. I think it offers quite a lot of value, and we're positive on the company. If you can take us to the next slide, please. So the results had come in ahead of expectations or management's guidance. So it was quite a resilient set of results. But where the key issue lies is on the outlook. I think the outlook has changed a bit, and as we unpack it a bit later on, we'll touch on the key points. So the balance sheet is at the strongest point we've seen in quite a long period of time. So net debt to EBITDA is at 0.8 times, slightly improved from last year, halved from what we saw 3-4 years ago. So they've been able to repatriate cash from the different opcos, and they've used that to pay down dividends. So the goal, as you'll see in the report, is that they want to get rid of all debt that's not coming from South Africa. So they're taking quite a conservative stance on that end. Yeah. So there's no change in recommendation. We maintain our buy, but there's definitely some movements on our intrinsic value. So we'll take you through that. So our intrinsic value has declined from about 197 Rand to 180 Rand. And the key reason around that is just on the outlook. We see margins being downgraded in South Africa, so we'll unpack that a bit. I think we were looking at margins improving even further from where they are, but now we keep it roughly flat, so that the direction is still positive, but we probably trimmed it down a bit. It's really been at the back of what we see in load shedding, and that's really the key issue around it. So it's a sector-wide issue. It's also affecting MTN, and that's locally. So we've seen some currency headwinds as well. I think those are a little bit short-dated, but we do take a more conservative stance, and that explains why we have a slightly lower exit multiple from our last communication. We'll move on to the next slide. So this just talks about where we're seeing performance come from. So as mentioned, the results were strong. Subscriber numbers improved by 6% in this period. And this is just looking at this chart looks at the main operating companies or main regions. So we see South Africa, the momentum has slowed, but they're up 4%. So management generally just guides around 4 to 6% in South Africa. So they came in line, slightly at the lower end. And Nigeria was doing well, so they've sorted out the NIM registration issues. We see Ghana as well, quite strong. So those have really been the drivers around the opcos. And we saw that active data subscribers were up about 12%. So data is definitely the area where it's driving performance. So we'll move on to the next slide to just touch on that a bit. So we see on this chart, data is there, and the third one, it's up 28%. That's really main drive. So we're seeing that growth coming through in all regions. So, but we're probably a little bit disappointed in is in the fintech business. We're looking for a growth around 20%. They've seen levies come through in this period. We also saw in Nigeria that they had system issues, so they were offline for about 2-3 months in this year. So it does set quite a low base for next year going forward. So they won that license in Nigeria, so that's still going to drive the top line going forward. So we haven't seen that getting into the base. So what as you see data grows, we were supposed to see also voice coming through, but voice starting to decline, but they're still being positive. It's growing overall. Thanks. The key issue or the key talking points has been around the margins in this business. It's sort of we point to in the presentation. So what we have here is the margins for the various operating companies or regions. So the grey line is Nigeria, and the group is the blue line. So the company is guiding towards is in the South African part of the region, which is the black line, where margins are coming down. So they had guided previously between 39 to 42%. So they had trimmed that down to around 37 to 39. But when you look at our forecast, we're roughly flat. So we were looking at this company improving going forward, and this is where the key issue lies. So they unpack it. So reason for the decline, 2% is roughly load shedding, so they need to buy more power, alternative power. So the Eskom issues being magnified. So they're always looking at things moving between stage 1 to stage 4, and roughly now what you're seeing is that stage 6 is something that's been here, especially in the last quarter. The other 100 bips was roughly management fees. So that is change in how they're reporting stuff is more you're losing that margin. So you're not really losing that margins. It's just being displaced into another area. So I also took a conservative route in the other regions. Just worried that it's going to be a challenge having pricing on going forward. But I think definitely they're still getting good economies of scale around the margins, and I think they're still at a healthy level. So that sort of explains the movement in our intrinsic value. So it's definitely us taking a conservative view going forward. Thanks. Want to move on to the next slide. So how does this play out on our valuation overall? So we had slightly lower exit multiple at 5.3 times, was probably closer to 6 initially, and within the bull case at 6 times, probably closer to around about 6.8 times. So that's where that and the margin sort of explains why we revised our intrinsic value downwards. But I think overall there's still quite some good positives. I think balance sheet is quite strong. I think definitely they can still sustain their top line going forward. And it's been growing at quite healthy levels. So you're seeing that structural demand in data coming through. I think that still has quite a lot of room to go, because see most of the regions is definitely underpenetrated where they operate in. But we do overall take a conservative stance. So they'll definitely unpack this a little bit more when we go to the Capital Markets Day. So they'll have that on the 31st of May and the 1st of June. So we'll definitely have more investment thesis unpacked from their perspective. But overall, we positive on the counter. We still like the company. We have about a 40% upside on the stock. Thank you. So look at the technicals next.
Thanks, Ats. Over to you, Shaun.
Okay. Yeah, so we're looking at MTN here, and you can see in a very short term, that very short sideways market there, that the shares been, call it, consolidating between a support of 124, and you can see the next line is 121. I'm calling this share neutral to bearish, in the sense that it's still trading below its moving averages. It's below its 21 and 40-day moving average, as well as this 200-day moving average. But you can see that gap is not so far off. So the bottom side is, as I say, 124. That's where we're trading around about now. Sorry, 124 and 121. That's the critical support levels. If it breaks through that, then we're looking at slightly bit lower, that long-term support level, but I don't think we'll get down to there. On the upside, we need to obviously break through that resistance level, which is around about the 133, that blue line, the upper of that narrow one. And then we got our moving average, our 200-day moving average about 137. So those are the two critical areas to break up. And then we got our longer term resistance trend line at 149. We break through that, and then we are 161. We're still way off our intrinsic value of 180. So we got a lot of upside potential. I'm very bullish on the share still, because you can see at the bottom graph is the MACD. It is oversold, but it's trading above its trigger line. There's no clear sell signals yet. That's why I'm more neutral on the share than bearish. But we've got some upside potential to go there. Okay, next slide. I'm also looking at Vodacom, very similar in the short term, moving sideways between a narrow range. What's that? Critical support levels at 120. We break through that. We still got a lower support at a bit lower. I can't remember what that price is there. But you can see the gap here with the moving averages, and the 200-day moving average is much bigger. So I'm more bearish to neutral on MAC on Vodacom. And you can see also with the MACD at the bottom, the oscillator at the bottom has crossed below its trigger line. It's pointing downwards, so it's pointing to more downside potential. So as I say, I'm more bearish on Vodacom compared to MTN. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Shaun. Thanks, Ati, for your comprehensive coverage. I realize that I'm looking at the wrong screen. Let me just move it back here so that I look you straight in the face. Guys, if you've got questions, you're welcome to just activate your mics and ask the question. We ask that you switch on your camera so that we can put a face to the voice. And then you're also welcome to type your questions in the chat. And we'll leave a couple of seconds for you to get those going. And then we can fire away at Vaughan and Ati to see whether you have questions about the company. Willem says, what led to the large drop around the 10th of March? I'm going to call up the chart here. I see there was a whack of a drop there. I don't know. Ati, do you perhaps know what happened on the 10th of March?
Yeah. So if you just look at that share price in context, so it had rallied out nicely before the 10th of March. So it's since our last communication, it's roughly flat. What you had there on that day was when the results came in. So that's when they guided towards slightly lower margins. I think that definitely spooked the market, and you saw the sell-off on that day. So it was really it was definitely around the guidance of the margin. So that's where the sell-off happened.
Thank you. I see. Let's see. Got another hand. Yes, Nitesh.
Hi, Sarel. Thank you very much. It's Nitesh from Accenture. Question around, there's talks of them spinning off their financial services, divisions now. And you were talking about you saw more upside, in fintech. Or do you see that the decoupling of that is that something you see will push higher to the intrinsic value?
Yes. So on that front, they were in the process of doing that. So what you do, you separate it legally, and what that means is that it's a separate entity but owned by MTN. So they're doing that with the fiber business. They're doing that with the fintech business, and now they're looking for the fintech in particular. They're looking for strategic partners. So they want to scale that business up. So that's why they're selling a minority interest. So I think between 0 to less than 20%. That's my guess. So they'll give quite a lot of clarity on the next coming results of the Capital Markets Day, where how far. But they found buyers. The buyers is not for financial reasons. The buyers is more for someone who can bring in expertise to help them scale that up. So that's why they're legally separating it as a separate business, but owned by MTN, so that they can then sell a portion of that business in particular, and the shareholder can have a little bit more transparency as well. So that's the idea behind that. They want to look for a strategic partner that's going to help them scale the business up even further.
Ati, maybe just remind the callers what percentage of your intrinsic value is from the fintech business, because you do value it separately in the sum of the parts.
Oh, thanks, Vaughan. So the fintech business, we apply a multiple of about 12 times. That's on an EV to EBITDA basis, and then it's about 23% of our total intrinsic value for the business. So I think that's definitely it's something that's not incorporated in the share price right now because of the bearish sentiment, just I think around telcos as a whole. And if you look at those scenarios that Vaughan has that for us, I really think it does provide that upside, which explains my bull case there.
Thank you, Ati. I see Swedish says, I know in the previous discussion of MTN, we had a long chat about what percentage of its revenue comes from Nigeria and the African countries. And it wasn't that significant. But we did discuss the problems that they had with repatriation of cash and fines that they were getting blindsided with. Swedish says MTN has been plagued with these fines and repatriation issues from African countries. Have these issues been resolved? Do you think they have been resolved, Ati?
So it will always be quite an ongoing thing. But what we saw in this period, so they were able to get up about 17 billion rand, and they used that to pay down the debt quite substantially. So in this period, we saw 6.5 billion. They paid down debt. So going forward, it's always quite affected by how the Nigerian economy is. Then when it's weak, they're more stringent around repatriation. But things going well, you do see a repatriation. So I think on the rest of the opcos, I think going forward we could see cash repatriation going forward, particularly in Nigeria. I think maybe not at the magnitude we saw this period, but it's something that's quite really hard to call. But I think the multiple that we use for that business is very conservative for the rate it's growing in because of those kind of issues.
Perhaps if I can jump in as well, Sarel, is that obviously a key part when the government go after MTN is when their tax receipts are quite low. Now, you know that private individuals pay about 5% of Nigerian tax. It's incredibly low. So the rest comes from the oil companies. At the moment, the oil price at $80 is quite good for them. And we went through a bad patch where they're pumping as low as 1.1 million barrels a day. I think they're back up to about 1.5 at the moment. So that tends to protect the company from these spurious fines, if we can call it that.
Thanks. That's a very good explanation. Thank you so much, Vaughan. Guys, any further questions? I don't see any further questions. And I created a poll for us today. Oh yeah, Tony says you showed daily chart, however, monthly chart shows downtrend in force. A dip below 120 will confirm lower levels, whilst a rise through 150 needed to suggest the higher levels of the intrinsic value. Yes, Tony, we do agree that it'll have to move through 150 before we can see the intrinsic value at 180. That we totally agree with. But if you look at previous pivot points on the chart and the way that it has acted in support, we don't think that the dip below 120 will be sustained, and I think most breakouts tend to fail. So I'll be mindful of not reacting to a dip, say, below 120. We've seen it dip below 120 in the not too recent past, towards the end of last year, but then it reversed in a very strong fashion from that level. I think, as Ati said, most of the downside stuff like load shedding and all that has been priced in. I mean, the analysts have even accounted for that in their intrinsic value calculations. So, yeah, whilst we should be mindful of something going down and something influencing it, we don't know what can influence it. If it could be another fine or whatever. But technically looking at it, there's strong support and it's starting to build a slight upward trend towards the right-hand side of this chart with support at the bottom. I see we've got another hand up. I just want to see who that is. Puso, yes, go for it.
Yeah, just a question. What's your intrinsic value that you place on Iran, the Iranian operations? And then secondly, which stock are you more bullish on, Vodacom or MTN?
So I'll answer that. So for Iran, I don't know it's on top of my head. I'll quickly check as I answer the questions for you. So in terms of the three companies within the sector, I think definitely MTN is the better placed one. We talk about the key issues that we're seeing now: load shedding and currency headwind from other African countries. I think Vodacom is also exposed. I think their countries that they play in is maybe much more conservative than the countries that that MTN is playing in. But the countries that MTN is in are growing much faster as there's much lower penetration. So I still prefer MTN. I think they're less exposed on a relative basis than Vodacom in terms of the load shedding issues. So I think Telkom, you've got 100% all of the issues being experienced by them, and they don't have the balance sheet to protect them as compared to the other two peers. So in terms of my preference, MTN first, and then Vodacom second, and Telkom lastly. And then just your questions on Iran. Just looking at it now, so my intrinsic value for that country is actually about 3% of the total IV for the business. So it's really quite small. So in terms of my valuation, it's only 3% of the total value. So it's very small.
Thanks very much, Ati. I see there's another question from Swedish.
Just before we go there, I can just say that just for the purposes of the call, Ati is a very conservative analyst, and we spend all our time fighting about how much more upside there is than how much more downside there is. So that just gives you a sense, 3% in Iran. Sorry, go ahead, Sarel.
Sure, thanks, Vaughan. Swadesh says, on your intrinsic value calc, what's the multiple? Is that the PE multiple? That multiple that you got there, Ati?
It's the EV to EBITDA multiple.
Right. Let's see if we haven't got any further questions. I don't know what the analysts feel like, but I feel like the market's building some sort of a base here, and I think there's actually some stocks starting to show potential, but I wanted to hear from the audience whether they agreed with me. So I'm going to activate the poll quickly, and we'll do a quick poll. Let me just see. It says loading. And then put that up for you, and you can answer that so long. And then the other thing I wanted to say is last week I asked that the guys who wanted to get the invite to this meeting via WhatsApp or other information must please send me their contact details via email to my email address, sarel.snyman@psg.co.za. A lot of people have sent me their stuff, and I will collate that and put together that WhatsApp group within the next week before the next meeting. So if there's anybody in the group that wants to join that WhatsApp broadcast group, feel free to drop me an email with your contact details, and then we'll have a look at it. So let's see. It says, it feels like the market's building a base and some stocks showing good potential. Yes or no? 16 responses so far. Just over 40 people in the meeting. Half of people have responded. And it seems like it's an overwhelming yes, which is good. Okay, guys. So the takeaway for me out of this meeting is that we don't have a clear buy signal on MTN, but we definitely do prefer MTN over Vodacom. We think there's a lot of upside potential, especially on the long term, and Vaughan and them are definitely keeping a close eye on the stock because for portfolio use. On the short term, though, the technicals aren't indicating clear buy signals, but we are close to support levels, and it might be one of those stocks that's showing some potential. Next week, Vaughan, will you refresh my memory? What are we talking about next week? I think next week Sasol again, eh?
I think you've got it. I think it's Sasol.
Yeah.
Next week, Thursday, is a public holiday.
Oh my golly, you're right. You muted, Vaughan?
So, sorry, are you hearing? Next Thursday is a public holiday.
Yeah, I completely forgot about it. So I guess Sasol will be the week after.
Yep.
Okay.
We will put out some work on it, but I doubt everyone will want to dial in on a public holiday.
Yeah, no, I don't think people will dial in. So next week we have got no meeting, guys, and then the week after we will resume and we'll be chatting about Sasol. Thanks very much for joining. I hope you all have a fantastic Thursday. Thanks for your responses to the poll, and thank you very much, Vaughan and Ati, for giving us your insights. Very interesting. Thanks.
Pleasure. Nicely done, Ati.
Cheers, guys. Have a good Thursday.
Thank you.
Bye.